Okay, colleagues, good morning and welcome to today's meeting for the Committee for the Economy. We will hear from the Minister, Dr. Kiva Archibald, on her budget for 25-26, the Minister's legislative programme and policy plans for the remainder of the mandate. As the Minister is scheduled to leave at 11:20, I'm asked the Committee to alter the order of the agenda and go straight to the Minister immediately after declarations of interest. Apologies, members from Kate Nicholl and Sinead McLaughlin will be joining us shortly. Is any member any interest they wish to declare at this stage? Student loan.
On receipt of student loan, yeah.
Yep.
So it's, hold on, look at this, Mr. Delargy, Mr. Honeyford, children,
Kids, yeah.
and children, Armstrong, and yourself, and Emma Sharon, and the chair says paid off.
I'm paid off.
Paid off. And Gary
Paid off. No, paid off.
Paid off.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I don't think the Minister's outside just yet. So we can take our ease for a minute then, Chair.
What we'll do is then we'll agree the minutes from last week. The minutes, members content with the minutes from last week's meeting? True and accurate reflection. Yeah. Thank you. Are there any matters arising that members wish to raise at this stage that aren't covered later in the agenda?
I think Jonathan.
You can do it now if
go ahead.
No, just to thank members for last week and the visits. It was extremely beneficial, I think, from the business's perspective, and I also think, on talking to members, that they also enjoyed the particulars around the visit. Bedfordshire, the new theme park has just been announced. Fantastic news for particularly a company like Deluxe Group who we visited. And it's so important now that our focus goes on ensuring we're part of that supply chain. So just interested for the future. I know we've got the Minister now, but something we're
Minister, you're very welcome. On behalf of the committee, can I welcome the Minister, Dr. Kiva Archibald, Minister for the Economy, Ian Stoughton, Permanent Secretary in the Department for the Economy, and Joanna Park, who is Financial Director at the Department. You're very welcome, Minister, and I realise you have to leave at 11:20, so thank you for giving us your time this morning. It's greatly appreciated. And if you're content, I'll hand over to you, Minister.
Yeah, and thank you, and apologies we have to leave that few minutes earlier, but hopefully we'll get through plenty. But thank you, Chair, and it's really good to be here today to discuss the progress that's being made against my economic vision and of course the challenges that we face in these very uncertain times. You will have received a copy of the Department's progress report on the 6th of February. This detailed the work that was progressed by my predecessor in the past 12 months. I will build upon these strong foundations to drive forward the 4 priorities of the economic vision. Since February, the pace has continued. In the last 8 weeks, I have taken a number of steps. I have published an action plan which continues our journey on the road to net zero and progresses our commitments within the Executive's energy strategy. I've also launched a consultation on offshore renewable energy to help identify areas to potentially develop offshore renewables. I have supported tourism promotion globally, attending the world's largest tourism exhibition in Berlin and meeting with tour operators across the United States. And I have continued to press the Home Office for mitigation measures as their electronic travel authorisation scheme begins to be felt by our tourism sector. I have also supported InvestNI with FDI and trade promotion, meeting with senior executives of American firms keen to set up or to grow their businesses here. In the last 2 months, I have also driven forward the work at McGee with the land necessary to drive forward the expansion of the campus now purchased. I have also ensured the continuation of flights from the City of Derry Airport to London Heathrow, and just last week I announced 6 new successful projects which benefited from a £600,000 Apprenticeship Inclusion Challenge Fund. This fund was established to trial new ways to remove barriers to apprenticeships for women, people with disabilities and people from disadvantaged areas. So it's been a busy first few months and this pace will continue. Looking ahead, I will soon publish a Green Skills Action Plan co-designed with industry. I will bring forward proposals for my Good Jobs Bill, as well as proposals to strengthen credit unions. I will also launch a circular economy strategy and continue to develop proposals for the enhanced investment zone. A key limit on our ability to deliver all the progress that we would like to is the difficult budgetary position faced by all departments. The final budget was confirmed last week and my officials are now working to understand the impacts of our final allocation, including the equality impacts, and will publish a consultation shortly. This will be shared with you as soon as possible. I cannot fund everything that I want to, but the resources available to me will be prioritised in line with the 4 pillars of my economic vision. Another significant challenge is the decision of President Trump to impose tariffs on the world. Last Wednesday morning I met with the British Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds and later with the Taoiseach Simon Harris. These were helpful meetings. There was unilateral agreement on early, frequent and open engagements, and these discussions have continued. Last Thursday morning at a conference of business leaders, I set out 5 asks of the British and Irish governments in response to the tariffs announced the previous evening. These were to keep the North's unique circumstances in mind in trade negotiations and in terms of any countermeasures, to act in concert to minimise divergence between Britain and the EU, to provide a properly resourced advice service for businesses so that they can understand how tariffs affect them, to improve the existing trading initiatives such as HMRC's duty reimbursement and waiver schemes, and to bring forward an economic package that protects our international competitiveness. For my part, my department will closely monitor the impact of the US tariffs and any countermeasures. On Monday morning, I met with over 20 business and trade union leaders from a wide variety of sectors. We spoke at length on their early reflections, concerns and questions, and I committed to continuing this engagement as this complex situation unfolds. So, Chair, I'm going to stop there and hand back to yourself, and I'm happy to take any questions that you or our members have.
No, I really appreciate that, Minister, and thank you. And it's been a busy number of weeks for you since you've taken office. Just in relation to the budget then, Minister, the committee's been made aware of huge concerns, particularly from our universities in Belfast, both Queen's and Ulster, at the proposed reduction in both the teaching grant and the research grant within the draft budget. Is the position of the department that the places at Queen's University and at Ulster University, at both Coleraine and at Belfast, will be reduced to increase student numbers at McGee?
So I think you have rightly highlighted the huge challenges that we're facing in terms of our budget. After the draft budget was announced, when officials analysed the pressures that we had identified against the allocation, we had 58 million of pressures, which is significant across the department. We took the approach, Connor, at that point in time, took the approach that we wanted to be able to prioritise the things that are set out in the economic vision, and across the department and ALBs, we asked for the impact of a 7.9% reduction to be modelled. So I assume that is the concerns that are being reflected to yourself. The final budget last week saw an increased allocation to the department, so we are working through that with officials now, and we'll be trying to again set it against our priority areas. And for me, skills and being able to provide pathways for people is really important to everything that we are trying to achieve, both across further and higher education. It's a really challenging landscape that we're facing, but my position is we want to do the absolute best that we possibly can. So we are pushing the limits in terms of what we can try to do in respect of our budgets for the incoming year. I think we all have our eyes wide open that we will not be in receipt of the same level of in-year funding that came across last year, which does mean that we are likely facing the situation where we have to live with more or less what we have right now, and hope that some more comes along in year. So we are trying to manage that. We are working with the universities in terms of what the profiles of the funding across the year looks like, and we are engaging to try and minimise as much as possible the impacts that will be felt, but we are still working through that process.
And currently, what's the proposed cut to Queen's University?
There isn't proposed cuts at this point in time. We are still working through the details of the the final allocation that was announced last week. So
The budget that was given to the committee last month, it said there would be a £6.6 million reduction in higher education support. That's not the case anymore.
So we are working through the detail of the additional allocations that we've received, and as I said, it's for me that what we want to try to achieve is to minimise the impact on areas as much as possible, and as it also says, skills and the broader further higher education landscape is really important to me in terms of everything that we are trying to achieve as a department.
And I suppose the 6.6 million is the difference between the proposed draft allocation for the overall student and higher education area against their draft their allocation for 24-25, and there will be differences in demand and in demand-led schemes and things like that. So it's not always, if that's not actually sorry.
Sorry, Sinead, you wouldn't mute.
That isn't the actual shortfall. They're looking at that to see what their current is against that, and the Minister has taken some action in year where possible because of the academic years where there's been some small overspends to reallocate that money to the universities, both in Ardale and Seedale, in order to try and minimise any impact into the next financial year.
And then just in relation to your legislative programme, you're committed to continuing to bring forward the Good Jobs Bill. Since Minister you've taken office, have you found any business organisation or business that supports your proposals?
So we are, as you will be aware, the consultation closed last year, and there was significant responses to the consultation, so we are working through those. We are actually coming to the end of that process. There's really been really good engagement in relation to the consultation itself, and we will be bringing forward our proposals to the executive in coming weeks. Obviously there was a number of things that were consulted on under that broad heading of the Good Jobs Bill, and at the same time, obviously, the British government has been consulting on their employment legislation, so we have got a lot of very considered responses, I have to say. So I would put on record my thanks to everybody that did take the time to engage on that really important issue, because it will help inform the decisions that I will be taking about the best way to update our employment law framework. I will be continuing to engage with both business representative organisations and trade unions in coming weeks in relation to it. I anticipate that once I'm in a position to bring proposals to the executive around that, then that engagement will continue as well. So I look forward to hearing the views and to how we move this forward. I think it's really important that we try to progress some of the really important aspects of that legislation that will really make a difference to people's lives, and will of course support businesses too. This is very much, from my perspective, about creating a floor of what the expectation is. As we all know, there are very many businesses that do a really good job in supporting their workers and in having good terms and conditions of employment, and this is about recognising that as well, but also ensuring that everybody has that kind of right to equal and fair treatment.
Yeah, okay. I just want to turn then to the department's annual accounts. What is the difficulty within the Department for the Economy of producing accounts that satisfy the Controller and Auditor General?
Well, I think it's worth saying in the first instance that the concerns that were highlighted by the Audit Office through their disclaimed opinion didn't bring into question any issues of value for money, of propriety or budget management. It's about the complexity of the consolidation of the accounts for the department and its ALBs, 18 sets of accounts, 4-year ends, 2 different currencies, different accounting standards, different accounting systems. And the CNAG herself recognised the complexity of that. So the department has already taken a number of steps in terms of improving the processes, and that identified the issues that were highlighted. And the department is continuing to take steps in terms of the improvements that are required in relation to the accounts for this financial year. Ian, you might want to add to what I've said in respect of that.
Yes, so the disclaimer on the accounts was in relation to two issues. One was errors found in prior years' accounts, which we had to adjust whenever we'd found them. The background to that is that the consolidation process was quite a difficult one. We'd made a number of improvements and brought in a new IT system with the help of external consultants. That IT system introduces a lot more clarity and transparency into the process, and what we found there that there were some entries in prior year accounts which were incorrectly recorded, and usually that was in wrong lines of the accounts. Those errors, when they're found, need to be corrected in the next year's accounts. What we found then ultimately is there's a net effect of about £15 million in 1 year and £1.6 million in the following year, which we couldn't work out why the entries were wrong in the first place, though we're satisfied that they're right now. So given the size of those numbers and the amount of adjustments that had to be made, the Audit Office felt that they couldn't form an opinion on the veracity of those accounts because of those issues. The second then issue was student loans. So in a couple of years ago, the Department of Education in England and the Student Loan Company moved to a new model for student loans in England. The devolved administrations had to stay with the old model for a period of time, and we're being progressively moved on to it. I think Wales is being done this year. We are looking in the course of the current financial year to move the Northern Ireland system onto that new model as well. There are divergences between the figures between the old model and the new model. The National Audit Office used to audit the old model for the NIAO. They have stopped doing that since, and so the NIAO couldn't place reliance on that external auditing function. And because the value of the loan book is so large, at £4 billion, any error, no matter how small, will then be a material impact on the accounts. So we haven't been able to satisfy the Audit Office on that. I would say that the first time that we got awareness that this was going to cause a problem for the financial year end accounts that were just reported on recently was in February of this year. So it is an issue that has arisen rather laterally. The Minister mentioned the complexity of the accounts. I would say that our accounts are the most complex of the Northern Ireland departments. I'm familiar with the Department for Communities. I used to work there, and as a board member there, I know that they have 14 arm's length bodies. We have 18 to consolidate. I also know that only one of their components, which is the housing executive, is subjected to a full audit as part of the consolidation process, whereas the majority of our components are subjected to full audit as part of that. So as a complex set of accounts that we need to bring together. There are millions of transactions which need to be reconciled, and it is a very challenging exercise to carry out. So we are working with the Audit Office, and I'm going to meet the Comptroller and Auditor General on the 2nd of May to talk about how we will plan the audit for the financial year which has just ended on the 31st of March to ensure that we meet the statutory deadline. Mr Honeyford will know, I did say at the Public Accounts hearing last month that I anticipated that the 24-25 accounts would also be disclaimed because the student loan issue has not been resolved in the financial year. That has just ended, and we know it's going to be, we're moving to the new system in the current financial year, and I suppose the logic of the Audit Office position would mean that because we haven't been able to reconcile those figures, that the disclaimer will continue in relation to that element. But we are working on improvements, including additional staff and resource and focus in the finance division to ensure that we achieve the statutory deadlines as best we can.
And then just to turn to the energy strategy then, Minister, are you still of the view that the Department will reach a target of 80% renewables by 2030?
Well, certainly that's the statutory target. It's in the climate legislation. So the department and everything that we are doing is working to achieve that target. I don't think any of us underestimate the scale of the challenge that there is in respect of being able to meet that challenge. One of the key challenges is, of course, planning and planning permissions. And and obviously the Department for Infrastructure have updates that they want to make to the SPPS, and that needs to come to the executive, and the Minister has been trying to bring that forward for a number of months now, and I think we would all want to see that brought forward as quickly as possible, because that is going to present a barrier to us in terms of being able to get the scale of renewable projects that we need online. There are a number of elements, and I mentioned some of them in my opening remarks about things that we are doing at the minute to move forward in relation to a number of elements of the energy strategy that will be key to delivering in respect of those targets as well. There's some really positive initiatives that are being undertaken. The Community Pathfinder project, for example, the consultation is out in respect of offshore renewables. The timelines for that are quite significant, as you will be aware as well, in respect of being able to get offshore renewables online, but the work continues, and I think there will be a number of developments over the coming year which will support the delivery of that target, not least the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, which I hope to be bringing forward in the near future.
Where are we with that? So industry was informed by the department that would be out by the 31st of March in terms of options for that. I haven't seen anything published yet, Minister.
So you will have seen the action plan that was published at the end of March, so we would hope that in the next number of weeks we will be bringing forward proposals in relation to obviously the work that has already been done, but the options for the way forward, and we would hope to be in the position to bring primary legislation before the Assembly this year as well, and then there will be subordinate regulations that will follow at a later point in time. Is the legislation required then to run the bidding process? Is that what and that's to happen in when, January 26th?
It'll be delayed now compared to January 26th. We had been looking at options which might include relying on powers in UK-wide legislation to allow us to run that scheme. Legal advice is that that's not viable for us. We do need to make primary legislation in the Assembly in Northern Ireland to cover that scheme, so it will be pushed into the third quarter of 2026. Now we can mitigate the impact of that in terms of meeting the targets by running a larger auction later in 2026 compared to the one that we were planning for the early part of 2026.
So the final design scheme will include the eligibility criteria, all of the roles and responsibilities, and outline the contract allocation process. So I'm sure that's something the committee will be very interested in when it's brought forward, and we'll be happy to come back and talk about it.
And then just finally from me, dual market access, Minister, obviously the department continues to make a big push on this. Have you any examples for committee today of new investments secured as a result of dual market access?
In respect of dual market access, were they obviously the only region that has that unique characteristic? I think it's notable that while other regions in Britain experience stagnation or drop in their exports, ours have actually increased both in 2023 and 2024. We have really strong external sales of goods from the north of Britain as well. So I think that clearly demonstrates the benefits of having that access into both the EU and British markets. I think that we have a job to do in terms of supporting local businesses to take advantage of that unique access, but also to highlight that more broadly in respect of the potential to invest here. And certainly when I was in the US last month, it was a key topic of conversation in relation to many of the investors that I had the opportunity to speak with, and similarly when I had accompanied InvestNI on engagements when I was in Berlin. So there is that significant interest, as you will know. Also, it takes some time to deliver on investment interest as well. So I anticipate that we will see further projects coming forward in the months and years ahead, and that are keen to utilise that benefit.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, I'm going to open up to colleagues. We've got about 7 minutes each. Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Minister, no one
Precise.
wants to see tariffs, but they're here, so business need clarity about what it means for them. And I'm afraid I don't feel that we're getting clarity, both from yourself, indeed, and your colleagues. The First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, and senior Sinn Féin reps, including your predecessor, has released statements talking about the protection of the all-Ireland economy. So can the Minister outline what actually does this mean? Are you advocating for businesses in Northern Ireland to be subject to the EU tariff on exports to the United States? That is 100% more than the United Kingdom.
I think that in the first instance, it's important to say none of us actually has clarity at the minute in respect of what tariffs mean. I have had the opportunity over recent days to engage with our business community and key business leaders and trade union leaders, and the lack of clarity, the lack of information is something that is being highlighted by them. We, of course, as a department are working hard to understand what the implications are, to understand the executive order itself. I know of businesses that are subject to the tariffs that have already been implemented in relation to steel and aluminium, who are exporting to the States and who have goods that are caught up at customs in terms of being processed at the minute. So it's a very complex situation that we're facing. Clearly, the complexity in respect of rules of origin also comes into play in relation to goods that are made here and exported, and we do have very integrated supply chains across the island. That has been highlighted over the many torturous years of the Brexit negotiations, and has resulted in the trading arrangements that we do now have, and I think we have to recognise the complexity of all of that. I think it's important to say as well, and this has been highlighted again by the business community, the kind of narrative that we're not so bad off because we only got 10% tariffs isn't a good one, because 10% tariffs are bad. They're all tariffs are bad for business. So I think that it's important to recognise the impact that this is going to have. I think all of the uncertainty as well is really just destabilising for businesses. And a key concern that was reflected in discussions that we had earlier in the week was business was that this has the potential not just to impact on business in relation to the tariffs themselves, but the fact that this could turn into a global slowdown, and I think that's where none of us want to be.
Minister, I don't think you've answered my specific question, and I would appreciate it's a very serious issue that we stop with the fence sitting. Do you believe we should be subject to the EU or the UK tariff? It's a simple question. If I'm a business owner in East Londonderry in your constituency right now, I have a right to know what my minister, the Minister for Northern Ireland Economy, is advocating.
And my position is very clear on this. I want to see a minimisation of tariffs across the board. I think the clear message that we have had from the business community and from political leaders right across both Britain and this island is that we want to see negotiations on the way forward. We want to try and minimise the impact that this is going to have, full stop. We have all called for cool and calm heads, and that we need to see some time to properly consider the impacts and properly consider the responses, because we don't want to see a tit for tat that escalates this, and like we were see all of us what's happening in respect of US-China relations at the minute, and the impact that is going to have on the global economy. So we want to minimise the impact, full stop, and I think everybody is in the space where they want to negotiate down with the tariffs that have currently been applied. As I say, it is a complex situation in respect of the tariffs that we have applied to us here in the north, the 10% that is applied from a UK perspective, and the 20% from the EU perspective. Those things interact with rules of origin as well, and the very fact that we have complex all-island supply chain mean that businesses have at this point a complete lack of clarity as to the tariffs that will impact. But I am clear on my position. I want to see a minimisation of tariffs that impact our businesses.
Well, Minister, I don't think you are clear, because because here's the point. To place a priority on the protection of the all-Ireland economy. Let me finish, Minister. I didn't interrupt you. To place focus on the all-Ireland economy is essentially recognising that that is an EU tariff. You're also leaving us vulnerable to counter tariffs from the EU, which again could devastate Northern Ireland businesses. So there doesn't seem to be clarity again. There seems to be a confusion in the Sinn Féin position as to exactly what you want to protect. The other point of question would be this: the body that's tasked, that's going to have to deal with businesses in the coming days who have known about tariffs because President Trump has talked about them in his campaign and indeed since he came to office, is InvestNI. Do you realise that over the course of the last number of months, InvestNI have lost something in the region of 120 years of direct economic development experience from their organisation? Now, how does that give business confidence that your department and indeed your arm's length bodies have a grip on this situation?
Well, to go back to your last point, first of all, in respect of, I think we cannot ignore that we have highly integrated all-island supply chains, and that will impact on the tariffs that businesses are subjected to. We also have our trading arrangements under the Windsor framework, and again, that will impact on the tariffs that businesses are subjected to. I have made clear my ask of the British government in respect of how they can support businesses to deal with that, and I have made clear my position in relation to what I want to see in respect of the negotiations in relation to tariffs. On the point in respect of InvestNI, as you will be aware, there was a critical report that was undertaken by Michael Lyons a couple of years ago, and a number of recommendations that came out of that report, and the department working alongside InvestNI have went through a very considered period of restructuring of the organisation. I'm confident in the leadership that of InvestNI as it stands. We have seen just in the last week the appointment of 2 senior executives, and there will be a further appointment in relation to that as well. So the experience and support that businesses will get will be what they require.
On finishing, Minister, I have just received correspondence, both written correspondence and verbal, to tell me from valued members of InvestNI that from the organisation point of view, morale is extremely low. I would ask you as a minister to take that on board. We can't hide behind a Lyons review now. We have a change. But with an organisation that's going through such flux and economies as they are right now, I believe this needs direct oversight from the Minister, and I would encourage you to do so.
Well, I don't think anybody is hiding behind the review. I think the review was incredibly constructive in terms of its recommendations and the actions that have been taken subsequently, both by investors and organisation, but by the department supporting it. Of course, if there are concerns being highlighted, I would encourage you to share those with us as well, and we will absolutely take account of those. Ian, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add in respect of that.
Every organisation that goes through a period of change, there will be some disquiet inside the organisation. I don't know what correspondence you've received. We do understand that there is a lot of positivity as well about the changes we've made and some of the appointments that have taken place. In relation to your comment about 120 years of experience being lost, the people who have been brought in to replace some of these individuals who have retired, I mean, quite a few of them were at the ends of their careers and would have been leaving the organisation in any event. They also have long-term experience, both working in the private sector and working in InvestNI in the area of investment and overseas trade. So I think we are satisfied that a strong senior team has been assembled. The leadership we're getting from both the chair and the chief executive is very strong, and I think they have a clear way forward mapped out. And we are working with them very closely to help them manage that transition the best we can.
Thank you. Padraig.
Thank you, Minister, and thanks for your answers and your statement so far. I wanted to start by asking for an update on the regional balance strategy. There's obviously huge work that has already gone into that, and it's to get an update on where things are at and what the plans for your department are in the time ahead.
Yep, thanks. And as you will know, Connor published the sub-regional economic plan back last October. One of the key elements of that were the local economic partnerships, which have now been established across all of the 11 council areas. I think a number of these are already up and running, and we would expect that they will all be established and functioning in the very near future. these I see it as being key to what we are trying to achieve from a regional balance perspective. They will bring together key partners from each of the council areas, and they will be tasked with developing their local economic plans. They are obviously being funded to support with that work, but I suppose the role of those partnerships will be to engage with departments and to leverage the expertise and investment from those in terms of supporting those particular projects. So I think that has been really positive. Obviously, we are dealing with a short mandate here too, so we can get actions in place and try and move things forward, and that's what we are keen to do. We are also, in terms of developing the regional balance work and the plans, InvestNI has published their business plan as well, which very much aligns with the department's 4 priority areas. There are targets within InvestNI's investment plans that will help deliver on our sub-regional targets as well. I suppose one of the other key things in respect of regional balance is the expansion of McGee. And a key milestone that we have met there only a few weeks ago is that we have now purchased all of the land that will be required to deliver on that expansion. So I think we're making really positive progress in respect of that particular piece of work as well. And the department is continuing to work with the university and all partners that will be critical to delivering on those expansion plans.
Thanks for that, and I'm glad you touched on McGee, because it was my next question actually, just to get a progress update. It's really good, I suppose, as an MLA and Derry, to see the progress that we have seen at McGee over the last while. It's fantastic to see our student numbers growing. It's fantastic to see the engagement with local community, and actually to ensure that the infrastructure is there and that it's moving towards the city rather than putting an additional pressure on communities. So it's really good that it's been pointed in that direction. The task force have obviously done a huge body of work around that. So it was just to get an update from you on the plans within the next 12-18 months, and just any engagement that the department are having in relation to that as well.
Yes, and I think the continued engagement with the community is really important, and a key reason behind the establishment of the task force was that it was going to require a number of partners to actually deliver on the ambition for 10,000 students, and that everybody has to be pointing in the same direction if that is to be achieved in a way that we would like it to be. Over the course of this academic year, there are already an additional 500 students at McGee. The acquisition of the land and the Timber Quay building, it will help deliver on the plans for the additional students. In the coming academic year, the Timber Quay building will accommodate 375 additional students. So it's really important that was acquired. The work is underway in terms of actually marketing the campus and the courses, and I think that is really important as well in terms of profiling it as a city and as a campus, and that again requires collaboration in terms of our efforts. I think that there is significant work still required, and I have been positively moved by the sentiment that I have seen and the positivity in the city in response to the announcements that have been made so far. I think there is a good buzz there, and I think the UCAS applications are reflective of that as well. There have been an increase in respect of both McGee and Coleraine in this for the incoming academic year, which I think is a really positive thing as well. So I think there's a lot of good things happening there, and we will continue to work really hard to deliver on that target.
Brilliant, thank you. And the visibility is an important one. I mean, even I know you've been down in Derry a number of times, even since you've taken over in this department. So that visibility and actually seeing not only McGee grow, but the Ebrington site grow and businesses come to our city and develop and obviously create good jobs, sustainable jobs in our city is imperative to creating that whole ecosystem around McGee. So I think there's been a huge amount of really positive work from yourself and from the department on that. So it has to definitely be recognised. My last point is just around the All-Ireland student mobility. Obviously, as you know, it's an issue I'm really interested in. And it was to get an update on what engagement there's been between officials in your department and those counterparts in the south, and how you kind of foresee. Obviously, in the last year, we've seen progress in CAO applications and the alignment of that. So, what further progress could we be looking at, and what is the department pushing for in the time ahead?
Yeah, and I think the announcements around CAO were positive ones, because obviously students from here were facing a barrier that was unfair in respect of their grades, and that was something that we had previously worked on and tried to highlight, and it is good to see that being corrected. In terms of the engagement across the island in respect of student mobility, we are seeing significant more numbers of students coming from the south to institutions in the north, and there aren't the same numbers of students from the north going south, so we want to encourage that. It was just yesterday that officials were meeting from our department in respect of skills and further and higher education with Departmental in the south. And I think that was a really positive engagement, and you might want to say something more in respect of that.
Yes, so we met our counterparts in the Department for Further Higher Education yesterday, and the Secretary General was there and I was there, and the subject of all-island student mobility is one of the things that came up during the course of the conversation, and we both agreed that we can do more to sort of smooth those transfers out a bit, and we need to look at the funding arrangements around places. Of course, what we need to ensure is that more student mobility across the border doesn't impact on the systems in an adverse way, and so there's plenty that we need to work through in the detail of it, but there's a lot of enthusiasm and interest in both jurisdictions to look at what we can do around this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. David?
I just pick on that first before we start. There's limited change for students to get entry to the south. It's not as positive as what you're saying. Basically, it's a change of an A level to an AS. That's it. You still need 3 A stars to get in. That's still a barrier to students getting into the south.
I think you're right. The bar is very high.
Ridiculously high.
Yes, but I suppose the competition for places is there across the board in respect of students in the south and students in the north. It is a very challenging system to try and navigate. I think that we are still working to try and minimise those barriers, because they are clear, and I think they're not the only barriers, obviously, that students face.
100%. My daughter's there, been through it, but to say that you're seeing change, there isn't a lot of change, is the point I'm making. Whenever we move on, I've quite a couple of things to go through, but the tariffs and we had in the chamber, unfortunately, the other day, the position for the American of why they've done it and the justification, rather than looking at our businesses and support for our businesses. But what engagement has there been between the UK government, the Irish government and the EU from the department around tariffs?
So that, as I said, I've had the opportunity to engage with British counterparts, both the Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds and the Trade Minister Douglas Alexander, and with the Taoiseach Simon Harris. And I'm directly after committee meeting today going to meet with Pascal Donoghue as well. And I, as I have put on record already, think that engagement is good. I think we have really got the point across, and the First and Deputy First Minister have also been involved in those engagements, but we have really got the point across that we need to see the interests of the North and our unique trading circumstances being taken into consideration in both the impact assessment that is happening, but also any potential for countermeasures, which is not obviously where we want to be. We want to see negotiations on the way forward here. I am assured that there are good lines of communication between the Cabinet Office and the Irish Government. I think that we will want to see closer collaboration and our involvement in those conversations, and that's something that we will be pushing for as well, because I think as we all try to navigate the way forward on this, it is important that there is join up.
Okay, quick, I'm going to scoot around a couple of issues just quickly because we've 7 minutes, so I'm trying to go. The energy support scheme, 5 megawatts is entry level. Why the difference north-south?
So we are still finalising the design of the scheme.
You've briefed that out, that it's 5 megawatts to the company?
Well, I haven't briefed it, but yeah.
Well, the department has.
We're still engaging around what the final design of the scheme will look like, and I've had the opportunity to engage with, and I think I spoke to you in the chamber about this previously as well, with Renewables NI and NEMO about the issues in respect of the energy support scheme or the electricity support scheme. And I think that there are reasons why that was being looked at as an option, and we have to understand what the implications are.
Okay. I don't want to see a barrier between trade here and as a committee. I think we want to see that renewable energy grow. So any barrier you're creating on the island to differentiate our businesses is not welcomed. So I'll just make that point. Going to McGee and higher education and Queen's and all the universities, are higher education student numbers increasing in the next year?
I don't have the details of that in front of me, David, so I'll be happy to correspond with you in respect of that.
Appreciate that. I'm just take up on the point.
Coming on behind us as well.
Yeah, no, that's fine. If you come back there, I'm scooting my time, but Philip raised that thing. We don't want to see displacement of students. We want to see more students. So we want to see McGee grow, but we don't want to see a displacement of students from the Belfast or Coleraine universities just for the sake of moving people about. It's got to be to grow our economy and grow the Derry area and the northwest area, and as well as Belfast. And
just to put on record, that's my position as well.
Okay, perfect. So perfect. No bother. You announced additional money for skills. There was a different 60 million off the top of my head was announced the other day for skills that was coming across. You just said this morning that there was 6.6 million reduction to universities, and that's plugging the gap. So it's actually not additional money. It's actually plugging the gap or potentially plugging the gap of what's been reduced. Is that correct? No.
Joanna, I'll let you maybe deal with the specifics on the funding.
Yeah, we received an additional 8 million of earmarked allocation for skills provision inside the final budget. So that was to support employers and workers to build the skills that we need for our economy. So it's for skills provision in general. And as I reflected on earlier, the 6.6% is the difference between their final budget allocation and the allocation this year, but there's lots of things that go into those numbers. It's not necessarily, translates over. You'll have demand-led schemes. The business area is looking at what that actual, shortfall in funding would be as regards to that. But we also took measures this year. You'll be aware when I was here at last committee, we received that additional funding from the executive, and we got a further 2 million, and that was allocated across to our universities, which will help because you can move it across academic years to manage out some of those pressures that will come in, in regards to that. But as Minister has pointed out, we've just received those allocations, so we're working through what the impact that will be.
So the 6.6 million reduction, because what we're talking about here is innovation research moving forward. So a lot of the spin-off companies that will come out into our economy into the future effectively are looking at a £6.6 million cut to that. So when will that be? When will that final budget? When will we have that detail for the committee to scrutinise?
So, and as Joanna says, that the 6.6 was in relation to the draft budget. There have been subsequent additions from January monitoring and beyond that as well that has helped with some of those figures, because we have put the money towards universities. We are working through the figures. We are clearly wanting to get this done as quickly as possible, because we want to get the equality impact assessment and the consultation done on it. So we will be moving at pace.
Okay, brilliant.
Final question.
Final thing, just the accounts then within the department. And you were in PAC, but you said a second ago, or Ian, you said a second ago, you brought in an outside body to help with accounts, okay? And you said that your complex accounts in the department. But whenever this comes through PAC, you have 25% of the accountants within the department already. Actually, more than 25%. You've actually 110 accountants within the Department of Economy, and that came out in PAC last week. Why do you need an outside body to come in, to pay an outside body to do more work? And then you said you need additional staff. If you have 110 accountants, how many accountants do you need within the department?
Just to clarify a couple of things, we didn't bring the external help in to help with the accounts. We brought them in with an IT solution that would help us deliver the accounts package. So the external support wasn't in the form of accountants; it was IT system. So we have 35 accountants in our finance division, and we've got 60 in various other parts of the department, including quite a number in the insolvency service, where they have to deal with external parties. 14 of the accountants are in non-finance roles, but they've basically been promoted into other posts and other positions. So including a couple of the senior staff in the department who are in other roles, have got accountancy qualifications. So the numbers in themselves don't indicate that we have a lot of people working on the accounts specifically, but we do have £1 billion worth of expenditure, which is quite complex to manage with 17 arm's length bodies. So there's a lot of work goes into managing contracts, managing services, managing delivery through partners. And we've got to keep a track of all that money. So quite a bit of the work that the accountants do is actually in Joanna's part of the finance division, which is about budgeting and in-year financial management. And then there's a relatively smaller team which looks after the accounting work with the Northern Ireland Audit Office. I don't think I said we needed additional accounting resources in the department. What we have done is reorganised. So we now have two grade 5 level, senior civil service level finance directors. Joanna, as I said, is looking after the budgeting and business partnering side of the work, the in-year financial monitoring, and then Sharon Hetherington, who you will have been familiar with, she has appeared. She is now taking responsibility for the audit and accounting.
Emma.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for coming in and for the presentation. So I wanted to touch on a question or a topic that's already been covered to some extent. Obviously, the announcement last week of tariffs and the, I suppose, panic that's caused around the world. And I suppose you can kind of take it for granted that everybody knows that we're dealing with kind of a volatile character here, and the thinking behind this, like the concern that's been created even within America and for American businesses, and the short-sightedness of the approach. But it does obviously leave us in a difficult position in the north in terms of our economy and the importance of our all-Ireland economy. And you've already referred to the fact that an awful lot of our production here depends on, items that are begin their country of origin. Technically speaking, is perhaps 6 miles down the road, but that just happens to cross a border and leaves things very difficult for us. So I just wondered if you touch more upon, because to some extent you're working with your hands tied behind your back because of the situation that we're in, but what your department is doing and how you're trying to work with others to mitigate our way out of this.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And I think that it is, as I said to both to Jonathan and David, it is a complex and very unclear situation, and we will have to continue to try and navigate our way through it as best as possible. I think maybe people had hoped that it would be more erratic in terms of maybe the tariffs would come off as quickly as they came on for us, in the same way as it happened in respect of Canada previously, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I think even the announcement, if you want to call that, overnight, that there are potentially tariffs coming on pharmaceuticals is really, really concerning. That would be one of our top exports to the US, And so that's something that would obviously cause concern for a lot of businesses here, but similarly so across the island and in Britain as well. Pharmaceuticals is an important export, so the implications are significant. But as I says, it's the entire situation that is created by tariffs in terms of the global economy that is problematic as well, and the uncertainty and the instability doesn't incentivize business to make decisions around investment or job creation. People push pause on those things when there are uncertain economic circumstances like what we're facing right now, and that isn't good. We can only do what we can control in some respects as well, and I think we do have a clear economic plan, and we are moving ahead with the priorities that we have under that and how we are supporting the development of our regional economy as well, and that's work that becomes increasingly important in terms of supporting Indigenous business, so that's something that the focus will very much continue to be on. The engagement with both the British government and Irish government, as I say, it has been positive. We want to continue to build on that and ensure that our interests are properly reflected, those of our businesses and all of the jobs that they support, and ultimately the costs that are going to impact on people living here. So that is something that we will continue to work really hard at. And alongside that, we have had good engagement, and we do have very good working relationships with our business representative organisations and trade unions, and again that's something that we will continue to utilise as much as possible. I think it is important that we are really joined up in this, and I did the engagement with businesses on Monday. I will be establishing a working group as well that will involve business leaders to help support the department in respect of the ask that we would be making around potential mitigations, for example, and to ensure that we are supporting businesses appropriately with the tools that we do have, particularly through InvestNI.
Thanks. And I think that, because that's what I'm saying, you know, that this has been imposed upon us, like so much of what we have to deal with in the north. And it's how we deal with that and how we react. And I know people have called for cool heads, but continuing that conversation. And I suppose that links into, I wanted to touch very briefly on the employment bill that you're bringing through, and I know that it's like a key piece of legislation for the department. And when you speak about that, it ties very nicely into the regional balance piece. I know in the constituency that I represent in Mid-Ulster, we have an awful lot of Indigenous business, a serious amount of construction, heavy engineering, manufacturing, all of whom are self-starters and who have managed to grow beyond anybody's expectations without any support from central government for decades now at this stage. And the message that I'm getting from them very clearly is, I mean, obviously with the impact of Brexit and all of that, there were always worries about, you know, getting staff, getting workforce, and as a natural capitalism in action, that meant then that the price of resource in terms of people was increasing consistently, and so wages in that sector are quite high, and the feedback that I'm getting from those businesses that they want to see their staff properly remunerated, and that they feel then that their workforce are more productive as a result, and that's what the data is telling us. And that change in attitude from Invest has been really appreciated. So I suppose I just think it's important to put that on record. A lot of those businesses are exporting to the US as well, and that's a massive channel. And even speaking to people who are, you know, importing parts from elsewhere in the world, and then their final product is going to the States, and there's that uncertainty. So I think that they feel that their minister is speaking up for them and talking to them, and that's really appreciated. And I think it's important to put that on the record. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And I think you made an important point there about our business community. They have been really resilient and adaptable. We have dealt with all of the difficult circumstances through Brexit, through COVID, and we still have businesses that are thriving and creating good jobs for people. And I don't think that we should let that be missed in this entire conversation. We will work really, really hard to support them, and that's the commitment that I have given to our business community.
Thank you. Gary?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, and your colleagues for coming along today. A couple of questions. The first one, as MLAs, I believe we're going to be judged on what we have done with this mandate, with the powers and the tools that we have had. One of the areas that I know, Minister, you'll be aware of is that of post-19 provision for those young people who have felt left behind for many, many years, those parents who have had serious concerns about their children and the young people, what they will do once they leave the education system. Many of us in this room, maybe all of us, have signed the Caleb's Cause pledge to support legislation, to support Caleb, but also the many, many young people who are affected. So, Minister, can you tell us where you're at in terms of that particular process? What is the likelihood of seeing change this side of 2027? And what support can be given in the interim to those many families, unfortunately, who feel left behind?
Thanks, Gary, for the question, because it is an issue I think that all of us recognise the importance of. I think many of us have been very moved by the campaign of Caleb's mummy, Alma, and I would put on record my solidarity with her and appreciation for the work that she has done in bringing that particular issue to the spotlight. I am aware also, as I'm sure all of us are, because we deal with issues through our constituency office, and we have special needs schools in our own constituencies as well, where we do see that what is essentially a cliff edge at 19 for those young people, and it is important that we look at how collectively we can do better in terms of providing support. We as a department provide a range of support for young people with learning disabilities or disabilities attending further education colleges, universities, vocational training facilities, but there is a gap there too, and I think we recognise that. So Connor, when he was in my position, had asked officials to go off and to look into this issue in more detail, and significant piece of work has been done in relation to that. I anticipate receiving the outworkings of that in the next short period of time. Part of that was some desk-based research to look at the provision and the legislation in different jurisdictions, and compare that to what we have in place. And part of it was engaging with young people, with parents, with schools and training provision and everybody, I suppose, that supports young people. And I think over 80 people and organisations have been engaged with as part of that process. So there has been a really good piece of work done, and I'm hoping to have a report on that in the next number of weeks. And I will, off the back of receiving that, be laying out the way forward. And I will also be engaging with Alma and other campaigners in respect of it as well.
Okay, no, thanks, Minister, and you've indicated a number of weeks, so we look forward to seeing that, and certainly as a committee, no doubt we'll have a keen interest in terms of what that means for those parents. A completely different topic, as I say, but it's also an important one, is around the issue I raised with the Finance Minister during questions on Monday around the spring statement. Obviously there was a lot of negative and bad news, but one of the areas that did see an increase in spending was in the area of defence. Now, when I asked the Minister about this, he responded in terms of language around bombs and bullets, and there's enough of that in the world. For me, I agree. I think that, of course, we need to advocate for peace and for safety for all of our citizens. And I suppose the angle that I was asking him on that respect was around the innovators that we have in Northern Ireland working in the space of AI, dealing with cyber attacks. As a minister, are you supportive of those businesses who provide that type of support, and would you be advocating for them in terms of that over £2 billion allocation of funding? Would you be advocating for them to be very much a part of that, without obviously advocating for war or advocating for any type of violence? And
I suppose I would align with where John was coming from and responded to that question. I think we should be seeing investment in public service and infrastructure and minimising the circumstances that create the necessity for defence in the first place. obviously those businesses will be engaging directly with the British government in respect of some of the announcements that they have made, and I would anticipate that that's how it will be managed.
Just ask, Minister, that you do support those businesses. They are here to keep all of us safe. They provide technologies that will protect all of our citizens from cyber attacks, and I think that that's something which should be encouraged. A final question, Chair, from me, and it was in relation to the investment zones and the enhanced investment zones. Obviously, the government have decided to take this forward as well, particularly within the Foyle constituency, Foyle Port. That particular area with the airport and all of that zone, there's a keen interest to see the benefits of what this could mean for our constituency. So, Minister, could you talk us through exactly where you're at in terms of the department and those conversations with the UK government? Yes,
so there has been close working with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government in relation to the co-design of what the Enhanced Investment Zone programme is going to look like. That has been a consistent piece of engagement, shall we say, an intensive piece of engagement, and we have, as you will know, previously indicated that we wanted the investment zone to look at the whole of the region and ensure there's opportunities right across. It is now likely to concentrate on advanced manufacturing, widening out the opportunities there. Very much there are a number of sectors that will fall under that umbrella, things like green tech, life and health sciences. There are lots of opportunities, and my officials in InvestNI are engaging with private enterprises in respect of the potential for projects to come forward. There is a process, I suppose, that has to be gone through with HCLG and a number of kind of milestones, and a couple of those are coming up very soon. So we will see more developments in I suppose in the very near future in respect of that, but we are keen to ensure really close collaboration with our business community to ensure that there is the type of impact that we want to see, and that the funding that is going to be invested in terms of the enhanced investment zone will leverage in further private investment. I think that's one of the key things in terms of the objectives from the British government side, and obviously from our own as well.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Thank you.
Diana.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here this morning. I just wanted to take you back to one piece of what is unfinished business, which is RHI, and ask when you plan to bring forward the closure of the scheme. Ofgem has indicated that it's going to withdraw in April 2026. So could you outline the expected closeout costs and the legal risks if the department is forced to assume direct administration?
And thanks for the question. We have done a big enough piece of work in respect of the closure of our HI. It's something that has been going on for quite some time now. Connor announced last July the executive's commitment to the closure of the scheme. A business case for the closure is currently with the Department of Finance, who is engaging with Treasury in respect of the funding arrangements for the closure of the scheme. And once that has been approved and agreed with Treasury, the arrangements will be brought to the executive. And we will have to bring forward legislation later this year in terms of the closure of the scheme. Do you want to say anything in respect of that, Ian, as well?
Yes, there's a sequence of decisions need to be taken, and the first one is around with the Treasury, that they're satisfied that the scheme meets the requirements for the AME funding. If our proposals don't, then they'll have to be reworked before we can take them to the executive and introduce them to the Assembly. So we have passed the business case to the Department of Finance, and they will do the engagement with the Treasury on that point. I think we're confident that we will get the answer that we're hoping for, because we have had quite a bit of engagement with the Treasury on these issues beforehand, but we have to get the formal decision on that. As the Minister said, then it'll be a decision for the Executive to take forward. As part of that, the tariff at which the closure payments will be made will have to be discussed and agreed, and as you're aware, the Assembly declined to approve the proposed change to the tariff last year, and so we've had to revisit that. I'm sure that will be an issue which will come up in discussions again. Until we get the agreement of the Treasury, I'd rather not talk about what the actual costs are at the minute, though they are affordable within the envelope of AME funding, which is made available for renewable heat, and it will allow some money then to be used, if we can get this matter settled, for other decarbonised and renewable heat projects. I know that a number of members have raised questions around, for example, heat pumps. You asked about legal risks. If we are required to take on responsibility for delivery of the current scheme, it doesn't actually change the profile of the legal risks, because we are already enjoined in whatever legal risks exist through the administration of the Ofgem's administration of the scheme. So it doesn't actually change the risk profile that we've currently got. Hopefully the closure process will be acceptable to the majority of the stakeholders, and then that will remove some of those risks and allow us to move on from this whole episode.
Are you confident that can meet the timeline before Ofgem withdraw from the scheme?
I think that if we're making sufficient progress, we will be able to talk to Ofgem about the exact details of the timing of their withdrawal from it, but that would require the bill to be progressing through the Assembly process. Obviously we'll do whatever we can to bring it forward within that time frame, but again we are dependent starting that process to get the Treasury approval of the budgetary position.
Thank you. Minister, just one other question. Within Fermanagh South Tyrone, I'm talking regional balance, sub-regional balance. I'm aware of some in some cases, short-term job layoffs in manufacturing and other manufacturing job layoffs. And just really being cognizant of that, with the difficulties that there is within trading sector and with exports. How do you see, what message can you give to that to that region, that the sub-economic plan that you can deliver for them, and what rescue packages before companies are tipped over the edge into a situation where they can no longer function?
And thanks for the question. And I suppose all of the work around the sub-region economic plan and the local economic partnerships is designed to try and support and enable each of the regions to bring forward their own plans. Obviously there are issues that people face more imminently than that, and particularly, as you've mentioned, in respect of what is happening currently as a result of tariff announcements, and that is why one of our asks of the British government has been we need to look at an economic package that is going to support business with international competitiveness, support business in terms of, and of course InvestNI will do this as well, exploring alternative markets and new markets, and I think that there are big opportunities there as well. But what other potential financial supports might be required, and I think that's the working group that we are establishing of business representatives will be important in terms of shaping any of those asks that we are bringing forward to the British government. I think the type of interventions that may be required are beyond the capability of the executive from a financial perspective to be able to deliver, and I think that is why we have put forward that ask of the British government that we need to look at an economic package here.
And there's been no economic or no significant job creation in that area for some time. I mean, do you think that there's going to be? Can you keep that just within your plans that the region does need some support? It needs support to have job creation, sustained job creation, to keep people there. Yeah, and I think that is something that we are very keen to drive forward, and as part of those local economic plans, I think that is really important. It's how each area is being supported to develop those plans, and then engage with departments and agencies like InvestNI to support the implementation of those plans. So absolutely, I think in terms of regional balance, it's right across all of the regions, and there are areas in particular that have been disadvantaged historically, and those are the ones that need the particular focus. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Diana. And Sinead, the final 7 minutes are yours.
Thank you very much, Minister, and good morning. I'm afraid I had some technical difficulties at the very beginning, and so I didn't hear your briefing, and I didn't hear most of the chair's questions. So apologies if you've already covered this, but I just want to take you back to some of the budget figures, and I want to talk about the McGee expansion. And obviously there has been good progress in relation to the work of the task force. But could you talk me through the 2025-26 budget, just for McGee, and particularly around the further student places at McGee for 25-26, just in terms of numbers? And if you could maybe tell me the number of students there now, and how many students do you expect this time next year?
Well, thanks, Sinead. And I think the part that you may have missed was in respect to we have the final budget allocation, but we are still working through the detail of what that's going to mean for each of the areas within the department. So we are still in the process of finalising what each of those allocations are going to be. And Joanna, you might want to speak to some of the detail of that. But obviously some of the announcements that have been made in recent weeks in relation to McGee and the acquisition both of the land and the Timber Key building, which will accommodate an additional 375 new students in the incoming academic year. So that is one of the areas of additionality. In terms of the numbers for this academic year, these obviously are shared from Ulster University in respect of the numbers, but there are 507 additional students compared to last year, which I think is very positive at the McGee campus, and it's something obviously we are keen to build upon going forward as well. So Joanna, do you want to maybe speak to the budget position?
Yes, so in respect of the McGee expansion project, within the draft allocations, but as Minister has pointed out, they're open to change. There has been £11.5 million of resource ale set aside for McGee expansion. And in addition to that, there's 4.4 million of executive earmarked funding, and that is for the current graduate entry medical school. So that is in addition to that 11.4 million. And there is also 12.5 million that has been allocated from the department's general capital allocation towards the capital projects and the expansion of McGee that is needed in the 25-26 financial year. And within that 12.5 million, is 1.1 million of earmarked funding, which is directly for the medical school.
Okay, sorry, Minister, you've said 507 additional places this year, but what is the current totality number of students at McGee at the moment?
And again,
we're working towards
these
the
figures
10,000.
have been shared by Ulster University, so 5844.
5844. So are you saying then the further student number places for next year, 2025, 20, is going to be, what number do you say? I know that the new building is going to take 375 students, but in addition to that?
So, Sinead, I'm not sure that I'm in the position to answer that question on the basis of obviously UCAS applications are still being processed, and I think it will be a later point in the year before we would know what that's going to look like.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Can you just give me some assurance that the future of the city of Derry Airport is now safe in light of your budget allocation of 3 million?
Ian, do you maybe want to speak to the business case?
Yeah, so last week or the week before, I approved the funding to match the Department for Transport's funding for the public service obligation route from City of Derry Airport to London. So that will continue for 4 years, in line with the Department for Transport's approval. The business case for the other funding, which we will give to Derry and Strabane City Council, in relation to the airport, that business case is with the Department of Finance currently.
So hopefully have a decision on that soon, Sinead.
Okay, good. In relation to the energy issue as well, I'm particularly concerned about investment confidence. Given the continued policy delays and infrastructure bottlenecks, How is the department planning to rebuild investor confidence and to ensure that Northern Ireland actually remains competitive with for example, GB and the Republic of Ireland in attracting green investment? We've had multiple evidence to the committee, and there's real concerns by the sector that investors are losing confidence. So what's the steps to ensure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, thanks, Sinead. And you will have seen just a couple of weeks ago we published the action plan for 2025. So that sets out, I suppose, the key milestones in respect of the energy strategy for this year. And I suppose, as I mentioned in one of my previous answers as well, one of the key challenges for us is in respect of planning, and we hope to see progress with the Department for Infrastructure's SPPS in the near future. As well, because that will be crucial in terms of being able to deliver on the projects that are required to meet our targets. I think in terms of the actions that are within the responsibility of this department, the renewable electricity support scheme is going to be really significant in terms of exactly what you're talking about and creating that pipeline of investment. So we are hoping to make progress on that in the very near future in terms of the announcement of the scheme design, but then obviously the bringing forward of the legislation later in the year to operationalise that.
Okay, with that, Minister, I know your time has perfectly elapsed, so thank you very much for your appearance here and to your officials. We really appreciate it, and we wish you continued good luck, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and your officials. Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, I appreciate your succinct questions in relation to that, and we covered a useful number of topics. Peter, is there anything you want to?
So, Chair, is the committee content to write to the department just again to seek sight of the impact assessments, which are going to be subject to a consultation, we've learned, and also with further detail on the HE places, particularly around McGee. That was, I think, all that members asked for, Chair.
Yeah, I would be keen just to get some further detail in relation to I think that's the first time there's been confirmation that the auction that was due to take place in January 26 is now going to be delayed to Q3 of 2026, and just further undermines our ability to reach those 2030 targets if we're not even going to run an auction to at least the end of 26 into 27. And the other one that would be useful just to find out is who's going to sit on the tariff working group, but I'm happy for anything else if any members have any other issues they wish to raise.
Just the number about the students.
Yeah.
It'd just be interesting to get that number that comes back as well. Just the overall student numbers.
Is committee content with all of this?
Great. Okay. Just to return back then to, we're just having a brief discussion, Jonathan, in relation to Game of Thrones and the Deluxe Group.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. Again, it was just about the visit, but obviously the huge excitement around the Disney announcement in Bedfordshire. I think it would be very, very useful for the committee to put in writing to the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, our support for the industry here and the huge potential it could have given the supply chain link to not only Deluxe Group but other companies. We heard about it when we went to Deluxe, just how many different companies are integrated into that supply chain. It's a huge opportunity space for them, and I think we could really get our weight behind that.
100%. And then our members also content that we contacted the department just in relation to some of the issues that were raised by Game of Thrones in terms of their signage and their current restrictive plan and conditions. Our members content to do that. Okay, and then finally, are the committee content that we write and congratulate our colleague Kate Nichol on the birth of her son? Perfect. Okay, we'll then move to item 7, members, which is Student Loans Department and Student Loan Company Education Authority. The committee will now have evidence.
Sorry, or just our officials here? Good timing, good timing.
We'll now receive evidence in respect of student loans and repayment issues from representatives of the Department, the Students' Loan Company and the Education Authority, and refer members to page 142. We're pleased to welcome our colleagues from the department. Mark Lee, who members will be aware is the Director of Higher Education, Johnny O'Callaghan, Head of Student Finance Department for the Economy, David Wallace, Deputy Chief Executive of the Student Loan Company, Stephen Darling, Director of Repayment and Customer Compliance Student Loan Company, and Joanne Fallon, who is the Deputy Student Finance Manager at the Education Authority. Colleagues, you're all very welcome. Thank you for coming along today. I'm happy to hand over to you at this stage.
And I'll make some very
Mark,
brief opening remarks on behalf of us all, Chair. So good morning, and thank you for inviting us to provide an overview of the processes in place for applying for and for the repayment of student loans. As you've just said, Chair, so I'm Mark Lee, Director of Higher Education at the Department for Economy, Johnny O'Callaghan, Head of Higher Education and Student Finance, who's part of my team, and we're grateful to colleagues from the Student Loan Company and the Education Authority who you've mentioned who are with us here today. So in terms of our various roles and responsibilities, at a very high level, the Department's responsible for setting policy, drafting legislation and funding the financial support awarded to students, and of course funding the operational costs of both the Student Loan Company and the Education Authority in relation to that work. The Student Loan Company is responsible for maintaining the online application portal and customer-facing content, issuing loan and grant payments to students and their institutions, and maintaining a record of individual student loans balances, while the Education Authority is responsible for approving applications for financial support from students and checking their eligibility and household incomes, for instance, are in line with the application submitted. In terms of the collection of repayments, the Student Loan Company works closely in conjunction with HMRC on the collection of those repayments through the PAYE tax system, and the SLC also collects repayments directly from borrowers who fall outside the UK tax system. You've received a detailed briefing, which I hope you found helpful. The briefing covers a range of issues, including terms and conditions, how they're communicated, budgeting and accounting for student loans, and how repayment errors are minimised and managed. I hope the briefing gives a really strong sense of our commitment to continuing improving the student experience, which is shared across the three organisations sitting here before you today. Perhaps one point just to note is that any changes to the statistical model which underpins the estimated value of outstanding loan debts are around the purpose of the department's financial statements and don't directly impact on the repayments that are being made by borrowers. So I hope that's just a helpful minor clarification, and we very much welcome your views and questions to us today. Thank you.
I'll hand over to my colleague Padraig, who had requested this. Padraig.
Thanks very much, and thanks for your briefing. Just as I know I asked quite a number of questions the last day, so I'll try and keep it more succinct today. But really I've been engaging with a number of students and previous students, and I've declared my interest already as somebody in receipt of a student loan. Basically, one of the issues which I wanted to raise with you was the fact that students, as we kind of talked about the last day, are actually paying interest on their student loan from the moment they take out the student loan. And to me, that's fundamentally unfair, on the basis that, unlike with a loan in a credit union or a bank or any other loan like that, you actually don't have the ability to pay that back from day one. You're obviously only going to be able to pay that back from when you finish university and when you finish your course. So has there been any assessment of kind of, I suppose, the equality impact of that? Has there been any equality impact assessment done around it? Has there been any engagement with students on that piece? Because I just think that when you're accruing interest from day one, but you actually you're not allowed to pay it back, is that fair? And I suppose, how do we actually guard against that to ensure that when students can pay back a student loan, that's fine, but when they can't, and they're still accruing interest on it, it just, a lot of people take out the loan on the basis that they believe that they're going to be paying back a certain amount, and actually when they come to pay it back, they're paying back substantially more.
So, I mean, that's partly about communication with students, and I'm sure David and Stephen will want to kind of add to what I say in a second. So I think first thing is we always try to be as clear as possible with the students, and we've continued to improve the communication to them about the interest that applies and how that will build over time. Students don't have to take a tuition fee loan, for instance. They can, seek to find other ways to pay those. But I think that the key thing for us is communicating really clearly to students when they sign up to the loans, what's included as part of those, and for us in Northern Ireland, ensuring that we've got a really good set of terms and conditions on offer to students, and I think they do compare well what we offer here in Northern Ireland compared to some other jurisdictions. I don't know whether David or Stephen want to say anything about that communication to students.
Thanks, Mark. Can I also extend my thanks for the opportunity and the invite to come here today, so very much appreciated. You're very, very correct in that it's not like a normal loan. It's a very unique instrument. An income contingent repayment obligation is what a previous chairman I've heard describe it as. And I think the fundamentally important thing there is that what is repaid is not a function of what is borrowed, which most loans would mean the repay is a function of what's borrowed. What's repaid is a function of what is earned. So it does have some very, very different features. So irrespective of which plan type that we're looking at, it's a very, very different financial instrument. And there are reasons that sit within the policy landscape for that go back to affordability, etc. So it is very different. And as Mark said, it's certainly our responsibility not only to collect every pound due, but to make sure at the outset we make it as clear as possible. I think from about 2018 onwards, we developed a much greater and richer suite of information and guidance. We try and not use the stock phrase of information, advice and guidance, which is normally used, and that's because there's no financial advice given. We need to be very careful we're not giving advice. But when an applicant is first of all looking to apply for their loan, we give an awful lot of information now, much more so than we would have done before. We have then introduced what is called in the sort of GDS landscape, so Government Digital Services, speed bumps to slow people down as they go through the process. So before they start, we try and give them as much information as possible. During the loan, we give them the same information and more again. And then at the end, before they can actually press the submit the application, there's a radio button that they have to click that effectively says, I have both read and understood. And we do invite them to download the terms and conditions, but I accept not everybody would do that irrespective of the loan. So I think we do as much as is possible. But I'll maybe ask Stephen Stephen, my colleague from the Student Loans Company, joined the Student Loans Company from the HMRC side of the student loans repayment system. So again, between us all, quite uniquely placed, hopefully to help with some of the areas of interest. Stephen, do you want to mention the repayment and when that becomes appropriate?
Yes, we begin communicating more detail about repayment in the months between the point of graduation, which is typically June, through to customers entering repayment in April. Now, we've had quite a lot of feedback from customers that this is a bit of a gap in the customer experience and their customer journey where there's not a great deal happening. They've gone through the application process and paying funding out to them, but there's then a time lag before they will go into repayment. So through our customer research and through that feedback, we've now introduced a series of communications to customers from the point of graduation through to them going into repayment the following April. And that really sets out the repayment terms and lets them know what to expect from the repayment experience. I'm just picking up on one of the points of your question, something David mentioned there. We do undertake extensive user research, so we're out talking to our customers regularly. We also have a customer panel that we meet with regularly as well. We do know that trying to build really good understanding of terms and conditions with students is a challenge. Students don't really bring a great deal of insight to us around what more we could do to help them understand terms and conditions. But like introducing those further communications, we are always working to try and make those improvements.
Look, I appreciate your answers, and I suppose, you know, for me and certainly for the committee, it's not From my perspective, it's not about pointing out what's wrong or what's been done wrong. It's about saying how can we do this better. And for me, a large number of students won't have access to any other type of loan because they'll be paying it back immediately. So this is the only option for them. And for me, therefore, it needs to be very, very clear from the outset. And I appreciate that, in terms of repayment, the graduation and so on, you're the other side of it then. You can't really do much about it when you're actually beginning to repay it. So I suppose really what I would be asking is, how can this advice be more clear from the outset? We all know we receive terms and conditions if we buy a new appliance, if for many things, and I'm sure we're all guilty. I certainly am of ticking the box and going on. So if you're 18 and we just had a discussion around CEO applications and UCAS applications, the last thing on your mind is going to be when you're paying this in 5, 7, 10 years time, whatever. So to me, the process needs to start there. It needs to be clear there, because the other worry that I would have, and I suppose where this is emanating from, is that in terms of the equality angle that I'm going at, is that the students who are applying for this are students who mightn't necessarily come from a background where they can repay this as easily. People who are reliant on these loans, particularly on maintenance loans, are going to be people who are coming from less affluent backgrounds, and therefore it's perpetuating a cycle where those who can't afford to go to university without this loan are actually then being saddled with this debt and this burden for quite a number of years. So I just kind of open it up for comment there. I don't know if there's anything else on that, but it's about getting the process back to square one for me. And actually, before students even apply for that, like, what engagement is there with schools in terms of open days, in terms of students who haven't actually gone to university yet? We need to move the dial back here and actually move it back to before students apply rather than after the process has been carried out.
Sure. And again, I'm sure David and maybe Stephen want to come in a minute. I mean, it is important to say we do still have some grants available here, maintenance grants dependent on household income, as well as a series of other grants related to specific circumstances around disability or caring allowances, or whether you have children and the like. So there are grant programs there, as well as, of course, hardship funds that are provided through the universities. I think, as David mentioned, the income contingent repayment is a really important bit of recognising that there are people coming from different backgrounds, and as I would say, it's essentially recognising that you only start repaying above a certain threshold in recognition that you've perhaps received some benefit from higher education, and there's a write-off period as well, which ensures that people don't pay beyond a certain period. So I think those seek to ensure that no one's disadvantaged in a way. I think we're, as was mentioned, I think sort to continually improve the communications with students. It's improved a lot since, say, 2018, I think you mentioned. We'll continue to seek feedback from students and see how else we can communicate the loans. Again, there might be some challenges there. It's probably hard for people to really maybe engage with the detail of student loans at a point when they're still maybe in their A-levels and haven't yet made final decisions around their options and what they're going to follow. But I don't know, David or Stephen, is there anything you want to add?
Thanks, Mark. The only thing I would add to that is I would say that the system doesn't wait until somebody has applied to introduce them to the concept of the loan. So before, and I think the page is before you apply, so inviting them to go on to understand what they can apply for, how it works, etc. So we're giving as much information via that. So that's via the SFNI website. I'm very conscious that the NI Direct website, which is not owned by the SLC, has very similar information again to try and promote wherever possible and understanding. The education authorities, I believe, also produce some bite-sized videos which are, and the target audience there is for schools, so school leavers and again parents as well. So I think that's another source which is, it's your good point about bringing it back up as early as possible in the timeline. And then the other thing that we've tried to do, And again, it goes to your very good point about the process and the timeline. So from school, typically, though, not all through the UCAS system. So again, working with UCAS, we've got embedded links so that it invites colleagues wherever possible through the UCAS process to explore what's available, what it means, etc. So short of having a physical presence in schools, I think we try collectively between us all to do as much as is reasonably possible. But I think everybody would accept it is a vitally important point because, as you said, it's the largest financial commitment they're taking on at a very early stage in their lives.
It's just two short questions on the back of that, Chair. The first one is, do you have any plans to move the date that interest accrues from on to when students have actually finished their course? Are there any plans around that or any conversations there?
So no is a very short answer. I think it's maybe helpful to set a bit of context to that. So the plan types are obviously delivered by working closely with the British Government and with HMRC in particular. So they are reliant on every employer using their payroll systems to collect those student loan amounts. So any change to those loan terms and conditions requires essentially every employer across here and in GB changing their collection systems for those students' loans. So it's a huge undertaking to change those terms and conditions. You know, in England moved to Plan 5 recently and changed their terms and conditions. That was a really significant and expensive undertaking and piece of work. So that's just to give you some context for what would need to be considered if we were to change any of the elements of the terms and conditions.
No, it is. I appreciate it's a huge body of work. I think for me, it's certainly a necessary one in terms of actually putting money back into the pockets of ordinary people. And that's fundamentally where it boils down to is actually how do we ensure that this process is fair, that it's equitable, that everybody has equal access but also equal opportunity to pay back in a reasonable way that isn't excessive. My other just final point is around, so obviously once you begin to repay, that comes off your salary each month. For people who perhaps are on sick leave, people who have long-term sickness, anybody who's out of work for a certain time and so on, can you just talk us through, just for info, some of those processes around how people who have begun to repay a student loan aren't detrimentally impacted if they're off on long-term sick or have something that is beyond their control that's preventing them from being able to pay back?
And just to add to my previous point, so there would be a significant cost if we were to seek to change the terms and conditions. So just in terms of that point, in terms of when people are off ill, etc., I think if we're working through the PAYE system, then it's obviously dependent on people's earnings that month and is adjusted to reflect as those earnings may go up or down. I'm not sure, David, whether there's anything you want to say, anything more about the collection side? And
I'll say a little bit if that's all right, and then again I'll ask my resident expert Stephen to add if there's anything. So again, back to the point about the uniqueness of the financial instrument, that's the income contingent repayment system. So payments are only made based on earnings, not on what is borrowed. I'm a very strong advocate for that. I'm not advertising him or his site or his product. Martin Lewis speaks very, very strongly about ignore the size of your loan because what you pay back is dependent upon what you're earning. So he would describe it as more akin to a graduate tax, and you can understand why. So it has some attributes that are more akin to that. The point being there, if somebody is not earning, then they're not actually going to be repaying. There is a flip side of that, which I think we might come on to, which is one of the questions I'm expecting later this morning around some of the errors or over repayments, which again is a function of the way in which the system works. So that's where somebody might have an increase in earnings for a short period of time within a particular year, but still under the threshold for the year in total. But the question you were asking is the sort of the other side of that coin. But if somebody's not earning, then effectively there is no repayments taken because it's done through the PAYE system. Stephen, would you?
Yeah, I wouldn't have much to add there really. SLC have no role in calculating the deductions that are taken through the tax system, and so that's calculated by each employer's payroll software in the same way that their payroll systems would calculate how much tax or national insurance someone would pay. So, as David said, as their earnings go down, that value will go down, and if it goes below the threshold, there would be no deduction.
Oh, I get you, and I do appreciate the fact that you're only paying it back once you earn over a certain threshold, but firstly that threshold is relatively low, and also if you're paying it back, and say you start paying back your loan at 25 and you might have it paid off at 40, if you don't start paying your loan back until you're 30, 35, you're actually paying a much higher loan, and that's the reality, because the interest has kept accruing during that period. So I think it's to say that it's kind of in one block and you pay it off regardless, this is the whole thing. It's the hidden costs that people don't see, and it is the fact that interest accrues, and that's the key part for me, that students aren't aware of that. So how do we draw that back and make it clear? I was going to ask other questions about the overpayments, but I appreciate other members want to come in.
No
so
problem.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Can I just ask them, what is the percentage of student loans that are fully repaid?
So that's probably estimated to the kind of RAB charge that we get. Johnny, do you want to say anything on that?
So in terms of the department's accounts, we have to show the fair value of the loan book, and that is effectively the net present value of all the future repayments that will be received for loans that have been issued to date. And so currently for loans being issued, the RAB charge is 13.8%. So that would imply that 86.2% of a loan would be repaid.
Yeah. It's worth saying that's a projected figure based on expectations around future earnings and interest rates, which obviously change. So obviously people repay over 25 years, so that reflects the projection that's expected at this time.
It was a remarkably high rate of repayment return, so 86% of people who take out a student loan fully repay it within 25 years. That's the Northern Ireland figure. And what's that? How does that compare to the rest of the United Kingdom?
It's certainly better, as in a higher rate of expected repayment than...
Is that because of the lower level of the tuition fees?
I suspect that's part of it, yeah. That there will be kind of multiple drivers that go in here, and it is worth saying, that we used Department for Education England to run a model for us which projects all of this as the other devolved administrations do, and they do continually update that. It's affected, I think, by kind of macroeconomic factors as well. How well the economy may be doing, so rates of employment, things like that, feed into the model as well.
And then of those 86% of people who fully repay their loan, do we know what percentage of those overpay?
No, I mean, David or Stephen might want to say something a bit more in terms of how overpayments are treated in a minute and the kind of numbers there, David.
Yes, again, I'll start, if I may, and then invite Stephen to add to it. The concept of over repaying is actually a really interesting one. So, in response to Mr. Delargy's question, I was saying the flip side of if somebody's not earning because they're long-term sick. So we have and it's wrong to think of it as an error. It's actually the way in which the loan system is designed. So we talk about thresholds, and we talk about the 25,000 threshold as if it is a single threshold. The threshold system actually works at pay period threshold. Yes. So if somebody's paid monthly, then it's the annual threshold divided by 12. If they're paid weekly, divided by 52. So at any point in time, depending on the payroll system, if somebody's paid weekly or monthly, there's a comparison through the employer's payroll system to the relevant threshold, weekly, monthly. No one gets paid annually. And the amount that's deducted if they're earning over the equivalent threshold, the 9% is deducted. So somebody could, during a year, in accordance with the provisions of the loan system and the repayment regulations, repay an amount because they might get a bonus in the middle of the year. Yes. Come to the end of the tax year, they may well be under the annual threshold. The regulations provide in those circumstances that the individual can then seek and request for a refund of that over repayment. The reason why I said leading in that it's a very interesting concept is, first of all, that therefore is not an error. It's a function of the design of the system. But what makes it particularly interesting is that when we in SLC reach out now to customers to say, we think you might be entitled to an it's called a below threshold over repayment refund. We do simplify the language with our customers. We think you might be entitled. Not all of them wish to take advantage of taking the money back because they recognise, well, actually, if I've over repaid it, then I'm going to ultimately reduce the interest I pay on the loan because it will be potentially repaid earlier. So the concept of over repayments is a tricky one. Where it becomes much simpler is, again, go to the design of the system. So in the UK and elsewhere, banks would love to have a repayment system that worked like this, where loans were repaid through the POI system. They'd have much less credit defaults on the loan books. And in some sense, it's a great system, but it works because of this interchange between data between an employer and HMRC and then the SLC who holds the loan balance. So when somebody comes towards repaying the loan at the end of their loan, it's only after they've repaid it that the information then flows through from employer to HMRC to ourselves. In that period of time, even though these updates are now very weekly, it's entirely possible, if not almost entirely likely, that everybody will over repay a small amount. Again, it's a design of the efficiency of the system and process. In these conditions, provided the individual has kept their contact details up to date on their online account, and that's one of the reasons why we labour that so important, we will automatically refund credit balance refunds to them for end of loan repayments. So I'm trying to draw two very different distinctions: an end of loan over repayment, which we will proactively repay, as opposed to an in life cycle repayment where we'll say to them, you might be entitled to the provision that the regs provide for you to ask for it to be refunded if you wish, but they don't always take advantage of that. Very often they don't want to.
And is there a figure then in terms of the average end of loan over repayment?
Well, over the last year, so if we take tax year 23-24, we have 3,000 customers here who have gone into credit with a total value of £1.6 million. Around half of those customers have already been refunded because, as David mentioned, they're either getting in touch with us for a refund or we're automatically refunding that money straight back into their bank. So around half the customers have had a refund. That's left only £60,000 outstanding in refunds for the remaining 50% of customers. So that remaining group have got very, very small refund values of pounds or even pennies. And that's where we see some customers not engaging with us for their refund.
And does that just stay in the, so say £2 somebody doesn't proactively come, that just sits in the...
Yeah, it's effectively dormant, so it will remain there. We will periodically run campaigns and try and kind of generate interest from customers to come through and settle that amount, request that money back, but ultimately it will just remain on the account.
And then finally for me, just in terms of the sale of the student loan book, is that being still looked at by the department?
We've not been looking at the sale of the student loan book recently, no.
You haven't engaged with any of the UK, the government's proposals in relation to that, no?
No discussions with us around sale of the Northern Ireland loan book?
No, I'm not aware of any live loan sales at the moment.
Okay. David?
Thank you. A couple of things just to pick up on. If a student from here is doing a master's, he has a maximum loan of £6,500. But if an English student doing a master's here has a maximum loan of £12,500, are there any plans to review that? Are there any plans to change that with it?
So it's certainly something we know that we need to have a look at and consider. There was a consultation that we did when the amount was increased to about £6,500. That was about 3 years ago, very roughly. I'd need to check the year, and I think it was recognised at that point that we should periodically review it, so we know that we need to look at that. I think the only question may be whether it's something we wrap up as part of the planned higher education funding review or seek to do more quickly. Just one minor point of difference is that the English amount is needed to cover the tuition fee and to provide for maintenance for the individual for living costs as well. But we certainly get correspondence through, and students from here who go study in England, for instance, often highlight the discrepancy.
When you say you need to look at it, what does that mean?
We will provide some advice to the Minister on the options in terms of whether she wants to look at that as part of the higher education funding review, or whether that's something we might need to look at more swiftly. Okay,
then if we look at students who do a second degree, so if they do medicine, they're doing a medical degree as their second, so they do pharmacy and then they go on to do medicine, they don't receive any maintenance grant or payment in their final year of their tuition fees, which that isn't the case in the rest of the UK. They also don't get the bursary from that's offered to Northern Ireland graduates. So is there any plans to change that?
We've introduced tuition fee loans for graduates studying graduate entry medicine in Northern Ireland for the first time. They can access maintenance support, but I'd need to go away and just check the details of that. There's been nothing flagged with us recently to suggest that there are problems or challenges, but if there are any gaps, very happy to look at them.
Yeah, the BMA are raising this as a major issue. So you have a lot of students that will not go in straight into medicine but do a first degree and then go into medicine and then can't fund that, and there's no student loan availability there. So there's an issue there if you could look.
Yeah, we have certainly extended the tuition fee loan. If there's a gap on the maintenance side, we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, so you increase the student tuition fee loan for graduates going to McGee, but you didn't do it for Queen's.
There is only one graduate entry programme in Northern Ireland, so Queen's is a standard 5-year medical degree. So the bulk of people going in there will be going after A-levels, for instance, or whatever those qualifications there. The scheme in McGee can only be accessed by people who have a degree. Now, we were out of kilter with Scotland, Wales and England in terms of not providing any tuition fee support to individuals going through that graduate entry process.
I'm welcoming the graduate entry. I'm not saying you don't do that. I'm welcoming that. I'm saying there's a disadvantage for a graduate that wants to go to Queen's.
To do a 5-year
medical course. Yeah, it's whenever you're doing it as your second degree. I'm welcoming that you're doing it in McGee, absolutely. But you're creating a disadvantage for...
And I think there's a broader question around support for second degrees that extends potentially beyond just medicine. So again, as part of the...
I'm just using medicine as an example.
Exactly, yeah. So that's certainly on our minds as something to look at as part of the higher education funding review. I think the only second degrees where we provide support at the minute, other than graduate entry medicine, is actually social work. And I think there's a question to be asked around, should we expand support for second degrees more broadly?
Well, I suppose the question is, why is the difference? Why is there a difference between our students? Why are our students being discriminated against other students in GB?
So in terms of the tuition fee loans, the tuition fee side, then they're not. I wasn't aware of any gap on the maintenance side, but I'll go and just double check that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Colleagues, if there's nothing further, can I thank you all very much indeed for coming along this afternoon. That's been useful, and we look forward to continuing to work with you, so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything we want to...
Chairperson, right to the department, just in terms of the graduate support for people undertaking medicine degrees, and the question about maintenance loans, and just comparison with the position on GB, and maybe just general further information about second degree support, what is maybe included in the review of HE.
Happy enough? Okay. We then move to item 8, members' correspondence, or members content to dispose of those as outlined in the index?
Chair, we've got a couple. I might need an answer from you. Okay, so in terms of the speakers for schools, I take it you would like a briefing from the Assembly Education Service on speakers for schools?
Yeah, I can do that.
Very good. And the other one was just what to do about the chair has been invited to an informal meeting with the utility regulator. Is committee content for the chairperson to attend, his diary permitting?
Yeah.
That's agreed. And I think that's about it then, chairperson.
Okay.
Sorry, there's also something in tabled items.
Yeah.
Sorry, which is that, in tabled items, there's a response from Sony. This was about renewable energy. There was a point they made about the Northwest, and so they've come back and clarified that. Can't tell us very much about smart metering yet, but is the committee content to note, chairperson?
Yeah, just on correspondence on, I think it's item 13.
Yes.
House of Lords scrutiny vehicle type approval issues. Just on reading the correspondence, I know we've just been CC'd in on it, but there is particular concern from our local car dealers. Now, I know this will cross over a number of different areas, but I'm just wondering whether or not you can maybe go away to consider whether or not we would have a briefing with those dealers who are having significant issues, whether it's the appropriate committee or not. I'll leave that for you to decipher, but just to see if it would be useful for us to find out the issues that they're facing.
Was the committee content for me to just have a chat with my colleagues in the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee, and if they're not doing it, then we could arrange something. That's committee's agreed.
Great. Item 9, forward work plan, Peter.
Briefly then, members, on forward work programme. Yes, we have in tabled items response from the Department for Education on our joint concurrent with the Committee for Education. I'm just going to have a wee chat with them about what that meeting will be about. So I was expecting that to be about careers, because that's a thing we talked about a year ago, and I think members had a reasonable expectation that it would be in progress. Also, I know members are probably not terribly excited about the review of SEA regulation, but it is cross-cutting and it is supposed to be concluded by Easter. The third one then is, what is the third one? So there's another bit which I can't remember, but I believe that the Committee for Education are very interested in post-19 SEN. And we heard the Minister refer to that, so that I will communicate with the Dallows and indicate the committee is particularly interested in those. We'd also, when we've written to it, we'd also talked about childcare. Very big issue, probably worthy of a meeting all on its own, I would suggest. There were other things around the 14 to 19 framework. Again, something that might be worthy of a meeting on its own. So I'm thinking it would probably be about those things I've just mentioned, maybe not so much about childcare this time, though I think the member had suggested maybe we have a regular, every 6 months or so, meeting with a joint concurrent with the Education Committee. Maybe that could be at the next one, depending on what we get back from this one. If members okay with that. Yep. Also, in terms of InvestNI, as was mentioned earlier today, new senior team is to be in place in the current quarter. There's a review of their investment strategy, which is to be done within the next 6 months. They're also to have a new set of regional offices, which the chairperson asked about in Assembly questions. So I'm suggesting maybe we try to get them in by October time, because by that stage we should have, they'll have their new team. They should have that review done, and we should know a bit more about the Northern Ireland regional offices. So if that works for members, great.
Okay. Item 10 then, members, is there any other business? If not, then we'll be meeting again on the 30th of April at the Northern Regional College in Coleraine. We'll send out further details in relation to that, and then the committee will adjourn at this stage and move into closed session to have a discussion.
We're not adjourning, but yes, okay, we'll just move into closed session.
Okay.
If that's members' content.
So we'll do that.